everyone. I hope you've all been doing well. I decided to come back with a video about arthritis. This topic, when I was studying for the MBCOT, for some reason tripped me up a lot. So I had a video on this, but I wanted to revise it to make it more organized and hopefully more helpful for you. I'm going to discuss rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. But as many of you already probably know, arthritis has various types and related conditions, but overall we associate it to joint pain and joint disease. And often this impacts the older adult population, but it is not limited to any sex or race or age. So you can get it earlier, on in your life. It is possible. And yeah, so let me get started. Starting on the left with rheumatoid arthritis, it's also abbreviated as RA. So rheumatoid arthritis has no cure. This one is progressive, which also means that it is chronic and inflammatory. So someone with RA may experience remission and times of exacerbation of joint attacks. So basically, that's just a fancy way of saying that you're going to have times where you don't have symptoms and all of a sudden you're going to have flare-ups. So you're not constantly at the same level of pain or stiffness, but for rheumatoid arthritis, people tend to have pain, stiffness, and fatigue. One way I like to remember that rheumatoid is the progressive one is that there is a lot of room to grow with rheumatoid arthritis. I know that usually that is used as a positive term, but I associate room for the rheumatoid part and that it is progressive because it has room to continuously, be chronic. So that's how I remember that, and hopefully that helps you out. For the intervention, since this has remission and exacerbations, acute times where, acute, remember, is just a brief period, it's temporary. So during that time, you're going to work on positioning, maybe some adaptive equipment. At this point, you do want the person to be doing active range of motion and functional activity education. So you're just with them, helping them get through this acute period and making sure they're using their body to functionally perform their activities at home on their own. Now, when the person is experiencing a flare-up, you want to switch to passive range of motion because this can be a very painful time. I drew lines around flare, and what I remember as flare and PROM is that if you just look at PROM as a word, it also looks like prom, which is something that in the American culture is a dance during high school. So when you go to this dance or when you go to prom, you dress up and you want to have a lot of flair. So flare up is for PROM, and that is how I remember that. I know some of these are so silly, but you know what? If it works, right? So moving on, now we're going to talk about osteoarthritis, and that one is abbreviated to OA. So I really think about the breakdown of osteo and arthritis from a medical terminology standpoint is that osteo relates to the bones, and arthritis, as we know, is joint pain. So this is very specific that they're putting joint pain and bones together. So this one is isolated to specific joints, and often it is the weight-bearing joints. This is non-inflammatory. It is a degenerative joint disease, so wear and tear. This one has local inflammation and decreased range of motion. Since it is localized inflammation, that is why it is isolated to a specific joint. OA comes with bone spurs. These came up a lot when I studied, and there are two types. There are Herbidons and Bouchards. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but they're both nodes. So the way I remember it is that Herbidons affects your DIP joints because when you put your hand up in front of you and pretend like you're holding an herb in your hand, they are being held between your DIPs, like the very tip, right? So that's how I think and remember Herbidons is for DIP joints. So Bouchard's nodes would be the opposite, and it would impact the PIP joints, which is the proximal joints. Moving on to intervention, I feel like OA is a lot more straightforward than RA. For OA, you want to do active range of motion with your patient, heat modalities, because heat modalities can be very helpful with decreasing pain and stiffness. So that is a great option when I was working with people at an outpatient hand setting. Most of the people who came in with OA, we did paraffin wax all the time because that heat just helped decrease the stiffness so much. And before that, they wouldn't necessarily be able to close their hand into a full fist, but afterwards their range would be a lot better. So think about how when you take a bath, like your joints and your muscles and everything just relaxes from the heat. So heat modalities for OA is great. Another thing that we would focus on is joint protection, which often goes hand in hand with energy conservation. So since OA impacts your weight-bearing joints and they're isolated to these specific joints, you want to make sure that you educate your patient on how they can do things functionally, but without hurting themselves and without using maybe their smaller joints or muscles, and trying to just adapt the way they do things to protect their bodies and to also conserve energy. Okay, if you need a break, now is the time to pause and stretch, get some tea, do your thing, because I'm going to move on to another section. I wanted to break down some of the basics that I find confusing sometimes. So with arthritis, generally, we want to avoid MMT because that's a lot of resistive pressure we're putting on people's joints, and that can be very painful if they are inflamed. So for the same reason, we want to avoid resistive exercises like light aerobics, aquatic therapy, things like that are okay, but you don't want to strain their bodies, put a lot of force or pressure on them. Also, it's usually no heat for especially the acute phases, acute RA, because heat, you already have inflammation, so you don't want to inflame the area even more, so no heat. And also, we want to limit PROM. Some things that are really great that we can say yes to for arthritis is functional activities. So you can encourage active range of motion. And if you find that they can't do active range, then you can do some light passive range. But we do want to encourage active range if possible. And also light stretching. This goes back to the light aerobics. So anything that is gentle and balanced for them is great. There are so many different types of splints for different needs, but I'm just going to mention a few. So for RA, a soft neoprene splint might be very nice because it's very functional. They can still move with it, so they can have them on but still go to work, do manual labor, things like that. And for acute phase, as well as the CMC arthritis, you can use a resting hand splint. Similarly, you can use a hand-based splint for CMC arthritis as well. I know modalities can be really tricky, but for the most part, if the person isn't in an acute phase of arthritis, then it is okay to use heat. Most people really, really like using heat when they have stiffness and pain because it really helps with their range of motion and decreasing pain. So with heat modalities, you can use baths, even hot water. Lots of people just wash their hands with hot water and tell me this really helps during the day. A heat pad works, a moist towel, paraffin wax if they have that. And some people also like to rotate the heat and the ice because it helps decrease the inflammation after you use heat if you close off with ice. So that's also an option. There are a lot of different modalities, and it really depends on the person and their preferences. But at the end of the day, I would stick to remembering for test taking purposes that you do want to avoid heat in acute inflammatory phases, but heat can be very helpful for someone who has chronic pain and stiffness. Alrighty, so you've made it to the end of the video. Thanks for hanging in there. I know this video was long, but I really wanted to get all the content in for you that I found relevant and useful, so I hope this helps. Good luck with your studies. I'm sure you're doing great, and I will catch you next time for whenever I finish editing the next video. Take care and have a great weekend. Bye.